so we can use that later on. So if we watch the packets crossing the bridge, what sorts of traffic would we expect to see? Obviously, anything UDP, ARP, TCP, but what would be most useful for gathering the information we need? Once again, we need the computer's MAC address, the computer's IP address, and the gateway's MAC address. Well, UDP, DNS, there might be some worthwhile information there. The problem there is sometimes, depending on the firewall configuration, the local firewall burb could actually act as the local segment's DNS server. So while that would be interesting and it could work, I would rather look someplace else to try to make it just be on the safe side. LDAP's another possibility if you're in an Active Directory environment. DHCP is not really useful, and NetBIOS isn't terribly useful. So UDP, aside from grabbing the DNS for use later on, I don't really think that UDP is the way to go. ARP actually is a pretty good candidate because it's got all the information we need. It'll have the IP address, it'll have the MAC addresses. The only problem with that is you have to, the way the questions are structured, it asks a question and it says, who has this IP address, tell this other guy. And then ARP will respond to that other guy, I'm here. Well, you can get the MAC address from the reply, but in order to figure out who asked the question, you have to go back and look at the question itself, so it's kind of a two-step process. It can be done. And on a local network segment, it's probably a fairly safe guess that if you captured 50 or 100 ARP packets, that the gateway is going to be the most ARPed for item on the local network. Because that's where, assuming you're on a client VLAN, that's where most of the traffic is going to go. Now, you could run into problems if there's services being offered up on the local machines, or there are file shares among the workstations or things like that, which is why I can't really give ARP the official seal of approval, but it does work fairly well. So it works. I've implemented it. It might not be it seems to be the fastest way, especially given the fact that local networks will ARP out fairly frequently, every 15-45 seconds for modern Windows OSs. So you can typically get it up and going fairly quickly in a matter of a couple minutes of just sitting and watching. But I think TCP is actually the way to go because you can get everything in one packet. So if you send a SYN request and you're in an Active Directory environment, you send a SYN request out for Kerberos or web or whatever, it's going to have the source destination, the source MAC of the computer. It'll have the destination MAC of the gateway because it's going outside the network, and it will have the IP address of the client behind it. So you can actually pick off everything you want just by grabbing one packet. And just coincidentally, a cold boot of a Windows box on an Active Directory network sent out 600 or more TCP packets to the domain controller immediately after booting up. So there's a lot of traffic if you can force a reboot. Plus, every 15 minutes or so when the Kerberos tickets expire, there'll be another burst of traffic. So as long as you're patient and willing to leave the device up for a while and you're on an Active Directory environment, you'll get all the traffic you need to be able to self-configure. But like I said, it takes a little while. So I've done it both ways. ARP is generally faster but potentially unreliable. TCP is going to be more reliable but takes a little while. To implement it with ARP, you just capture a bunch of ARP traffic, do a little gymnastics with Unix command line to capture file. You read from the capture file, you grep for the questions, you grep out the information, you sort it, you count it, you sort it in reverse, so you get the top number of the top item that was ARPed for on the local wire. And then you can, using that information, go back into the file and figure out who asked the question so you can get the last piece of information you need. So TCP is actually really a lot easier. You just wait for the one packet you want and grab all the information you need. I use Kerberos because in an Active Directory environment, typically Kerberos tickets will be going out periodically. You're guaranteed that the Kerberos ticket is going to go to a domain controller. It's not going to go off into Never Never Land. And in all likelihood, the domain controller is not going to be on the local segment with the workstations. So wait for one packet, parse through it, and away we go. So the grabbing that information is actually pretty straightforward. You capture the packet, you dump it to a file, you read it from the file, you awk out the information you want, and you get the source MAC, the destination MAC, the computer IP. So the fully automated script set up the various interfaces. I went ahead and automatically grabbed the MAC address of the switch side of the interface. Computer interface, bridge interface, all the stuff's the same. Bring up the bridge, switch the MAC address, reset the link. So at this point, we're up transparent. So now we wait with the TCP dump line until we see a Kerberos packet fly across the wire. We then basically awk out the information we want, set it to the variables, set up the ARP tables and IP tables to drop all of our traffic, configure up the bridge interface, set up our NAT rules, start up SSH if we're listening, start up ARP tables, or set ARP tables and IP tables to drop the rules. And once again, we're still not, unfortunately, going real well with the demo. I'll see if I can get it working here in a few minutes. But I'll just kind of press on through since things aren't going well on the demo side. So is there any good way of detecting whether or not this is going on the local wire? The answer is probably not. Yeah, user awareness. The same guys that bring in laptops from home, bring in picture frames pre-infected with malware to plug into their computers. The ones that leave the badges, piggyback, do all those things that users aren't supposed to do on your network. They're probably the best people to figure out what's wrong in their cube. Unfortunately, you could probably put a sticker on something like this with network cables running in and out of it, says network signal booster, and defeat the first line of security. But in all honesty, this is a physical attack. So physically looking at the wires, physical inspection is the best way to see whether or not something unusual is plugged into your network. Now, if you have a 100,000 square foot building with thousands of network drops, obviously the users are the best way of doing that. So you have to be able to empower your users to be able to look at what's under there and ask questions if they see something that they think they shouldn't. Unfortunately, most places aren't like that. Most admins don't want their users anywhere near anything that they could screw up. So in all likelihood, user awareness is probably not the best way to go. Perfect world, yes. So traffic analysis. Now, the packets that we send out are being sourced from a Linux box. So the TTLs will be, by default, 64, whereas Windows boxes are usually 128. Now, we can change this, but once again, if you figure out something hanky's going on your network by noticing that traffic leaving the local subnet has different TTL values, I am more than willing to give you the thumbs up. It's possible, but most of the environments I've been to, it's highly unlikely that this will get caught. And the default TCP window size differs between Windows and Linux, and there's some tunables. I've played with it, but it didn't really seem to do much. So once again, if you've got your stuff buttoned down to that level, hey, congrats. So like I talked about, the seemed to be a lot of traffic destined for the local network coming from the local segment as a side effect of our using the MAC address of the gateway to do all of our routing. We could probably fix that just by watching ARP requests on the wire and creating static ARP entries for every item that we see, so we can communicate with local devices without going through the gateway. And probably wouldn't be too hard to repurpose something like ARP Watch to do that automatically for us. But you know, if you're capable of seeing that something weird like that is going off on the network, then hey, more power to you. Latency. Yeah, it can add up to a couple orders of magnitude on packet latency. Seems like on local tests I've done on 100 meg, it maybe adds 40, 50 milliseconds. If the link's saturated, it might go higher than that, but yeah, the average user isn't going to catch that. Same thing with throughput. I mean, I managed to SCP a 3.5 gig file through one of these plugs on a 100 meg link, and it went through at about 70 megs, so that's actually pretty good. You know, it's not horribly slow. Now, some of the embedded devices out there, you know, if it's running a really slow processor, you could probably run into some problems, but these plugs, for example, are 1200 megahertz, so you're probably got enough horsepower. I haven't been brave enough, and I don't have a USB gig adapter, but I haven't been brave enough to try gig to see what kind of throughput you actually have to push through it to break it. But large files over 100 meg don't seem to be a problem. Speed duplex mismatch. So if you're running gig and all of a sudden, you know, a port drops to 100 meg or something like that, well, that could be a sign something weird's going on. But in all honesty, I think for any large environment, the chances of every single device on the network being all the same is probably pretty low with life cycle replacement and things like that. Plus, you'd have to be really awake to be able to catch the fact that port 3 on switch 5, building 3, floor 2, switched from gig to 100. That would be that seems like just a noise level alert that unless you were looking specifically for something weird like that, you probably wouldn't catch. I could be wrong, but so once again, the likely result is probably not going to be able to detect it that way. Excessive up-down notices. Touched on this a little bit earlier. In all honesty, the authentication server is probably going to see a fairly steady stream of requests coming in and out. Link statuses go up and down a fair amount. It's pretty easy to kick a cable. It's pretty easy to unplug, reboot a machine, even a switch reboot, stuff like that. All that would cause a link to reset, and even a flaky cable, you know. So I don't really see that that would be a reliable way, but it's something that if you had a SIM, you could probably try to come up with an event for.